Real families, real farms, real food. Welcome to Arizona Agriculture Connection with Maricopa County Farm Bureau. My name is Nicole Clements, Executive Director, and I'll be your host. Maricopa County Farm Bureau is the voice of agriculture in a community that thrives on the dichotomy of urban and rural agriculture operations. This podcast is a home for farmers, ranchers, food lovers, prospective agriculturalists, and those looking to connect the food on their plate with the farm that it came from. As we take an inside look at agriculture in Arizona, we will delve into topics like ag technology, policy, food preparation, and everything in between. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform with new episodes every Wednesday. Arizona Agriculture Connection is hosted by Maricopa County Farm Bureau and sponsored by Paloma Ready Mix and Materials, a proud supporter of agriculture and our communities. Be sure to subscribe and share your favorite episodes with your friends. For more interactions, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Maricopa County FB. Now let's discover some Arizona agriculture. Welcome back, Arizona Aggies, to another edition of Arizona Agriculture Connection. And this week, I have a very special guest who also happens to be a member of our board here at Maricopa County Farm Bureau, a partner at Tumbling T Ranch, Mr. Ross Rayner. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so happy that you could take the time to be here. I know your schedule is crazy.
Oh, I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. We're so glad that you could be here. So you guys have a lot going on. So really appreciate you taking the time and doing that. But give us a little bit about your background. You know, what did you go to school for? How was growing up on the ranch? And then what is that like today?
Sure. So I actually grew up, I would say, my dad would say in town meaning I was born in Litchfield Park. You know, I lived there pretty much my whole life. The family headquarters where we're at right now is in Goodyear, right at Broadway and Bullard, basically, in what was used to be a pretty agrarian area and is no longer. A little bit about myself and my background. I was in 4-H from the time I was, 8, I think, whenever you can start 4-H. Did hogs for a long time. Transitioned into FFA in high school, was a Green Hand president, a chapter president at Millennium. I had a greenhouse that was defunct, like nobody was operating it, and hadn't been for several years at that program in Millennium, and then kind of brought that back to life, spent some money and tried to make a SAE project out of that. Still was doing hogs pretty much the whole time at the barn that we had there. Unfortunately, Millennium is, continually expanding schools, so that's part of the reason they moved the ag program, was they didn't have room for any of that kind of stuff anymore, basically. I was on the Parley Pro team, did a lot of different CDEs through FFA, and then went to University of Arizona for my undergrad and got a degree in Bachelor of Science in agricultural economics, and stayed in Tucson for a while, 6 years. And then came back and started working on the ranch, farm, basically, again, in, I want to say 2018. So in grand scheme of things, I've really been here, and been involved in one way or another pretty much my whole life. I've always known what was, going on. Been going with my dad to meetings since I was a child, but, been working full time here for however long that is, 7 or 8 years. And while working here, went back to school at Arizona State University to get my Master of Legal Studies. That was part of the reason I was in college for a little bit longer, was I was thinking about going to law school, took the LSAT, was, doing applications and stuff to different universities, trying to get in, and then started looking at costs and, trying to make a decision about whether law school made sense if I was going to, probably come work on the farm, and basically settled on a happy medium of, something that was significantly cheaper, but still gave me a lot of, it's basically, the degree I have is essentially like going to the first, year and a half of law school. You learn a lot of the underlying theory and, the grunt work or the paperwork or the, the book work, I guess, would be the best term for it. And then you skip the part where you start learning how to practice law, basically, or like do courtroom stuff, because I'm never going to do that, and I'm not really interested in doing that. So that's pretty much brings me to where I am today. Serve on several different boards. I'm on the Arizona Cotton Growers Board, and through Cotton Growers, I'm on a director in Cotton Incorporated, which is the marketing research division for U.S. cotton to the world. It's a non-political, non-biased. I mean, it receives checkoff money through the bail checkoff program through USDA, through the government. So it's not allowed to be partisan, essentially. That's what National Cotton Council is for, which is a related but separate company that is allowed to be political. But Cotton Incorporated does a lot of fantastic work with cotton research across the entire cotton belt, and like I said, they promote cotton as a fiber, basically, to the world. They promote U.S. cotton above all others, but frankly, a lot of the research they do benefits cotton as a fiber, basically, for everybody. So I'm also a board member on a irrigation district. My family owns some land in California for the time being. We've been slowly selling most of our property in California, but I serve as a board member on the irrigation district for where our property is over there. It's a very small district, so it's not a big job, but just try to represent the business kind of best I can.
So you've been kind of heavily involved and engaged with everything you've done, from 4-H at 8 years old to FFA, into, your career here at the farm. What do you think kind of drives that engagement, and what is the value in it to you as a producer?
Sure. I would say that the easiest answer to that is just I've always had a model example in my dad doing the very similar things that he's been representing the family for many decades in, many capacities. But the short answer to me is basically that I have the ability to do so. So the way that our business is structured, it's my dad. Originally, it was my dad and his two brothers. My uncle, one of his brothers passed away a couple of years ago, so it's just my dad and his one brother, so my uncle, and then each of them have a son, and then my dad has me. So I have two cousins and myself. And between my uncle and my two cousins, they spend a lot of time on kind of the day-to-day operations of the farm. Like, they're the ones doing a lot of like the crop planning and irrigation scheduling and picking and planting and setting up fertilizer and chemical sprays and whatever else kind of needs to be done, solving problems. I mean, we all jump in wherever we need to, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, nothing happens in a vacuum. Like, everyone's kind of relaying decisions that they're making or talking about what kind of needs to happen next. But having that many people involved certainly gives more flexibility to the role that my dad and I can have on doing things like these engagement. I think it's very hard if you're either a single producer or even a couple of people to frankly have that time commitment to do a lot of these things. And it's just been instilled in me since I was young that it's important to advocate for agriculture in the state, nationally, to represent. Basically, if you don't represent your own interests, nobody's going to really do it for you. And when it comes to things like government regulation, economic policy, a whole host of issues that face, even things like zoning and city level ordinance. The list is enormous for the vast majority of the population. This is a kind of a touchstone of Farm Bureau ideology, but vast majority of the population does not have any idea kind of what is involved in an agricultural operation and the struggles that come with it, and needing to go to people firsthand and give them a firsthand experience of these are the kinds of things that I deal with on a daily basis, that my family deals with. That advocacy, I think, is a critical piece that everybody needs to hear, and they want to hear it firsthand is my experience.
So speaking of the operation, so what all do you grow and raise here?
So it's a diversified farming operation. Our acreage is unfortunately changing. It seems like almost weekly, but I would say at current moment we have about 5,000 acres of cultivated land spread over a pretty decently wide area. We have this property where we're at right here in Goodyear, a little bit in Tolleson, and then Buckeye, Gila Bend, and then, well, there's sort of two areas in Gila Bend, North Gila Bend, and north of Gila Bend, the town, and then another area out near Painted Rock Dam. That's my other cousin, Tyson, who farms out there and manages that property for us. It is surrounded by a BLM allotment of 33,000 acres, I believe, grazing land. We're not big cattle people necessarily, but we do have I think he's got about 40 head left out there that he's managing too, which, 40 head on 33,000 acres is pretty good. It is an ephemeral range though, so it's not there's not a dedicated, doesn't have a, what's the term, animal unit month. Like it's not a, BLM has to okay that we're, putting any cattle out there, which after the rain we've had recently shouldn't be, too big of a problem. But as far as crops go, we have a pretty solidified crop rotation that my dad and his brothers and my cousins developed probably over 30 years ago now. It's been the only kind of rotation I've ever known. I actually had a presentation recently where my dad spoke to some farmers in Argentina virtually about the kind of no-till or minimum tillage operation that we run here. And when I was going through the presentation with him, he was kind of, there's some questions in there about, how it compared to the conventional farming system that we did before. And he was, kind of looking at me, and I was like, I wasn't born, Dad. Like it's been an entire, this is all I've ever known my whole life. But basically it operates on so about half the farm at any given time, we have about half of it in alfalfa, and we try to keep it in alfalfa for 4 years. And then the other half is either wheat or cotton, depending on time of year, and mixed in there also depending on dairy contracts, and could be corn or sorghum silage for forage. We also do with wheat, could be either forage wheat or durum wheat, which is for pasta. That kind of mix depends on, like I said, what dairies in the area need. We're very reliant on them for, sell feed to. And that's been an unfortunate thing in the last few years too, as there's been, a number of dairies that have gone out of business, mostly just from, selling out, basically selling their property. And there's been some that have picked up the slack in terms of, adding more cows to their operation, but still it's overall, I don't know the numbers, but it's overall got to be a net loss to the area. And you can truck feed, a ways, but it doesn't really make sense economically usually to do that. So we try to practice a conservation tillage system, like I mentioned. That what that essentially means is that we haven't plowed anything on, especially here around the headquarters property for 30 years. I mean, we try to disturb the soil to the least extent possible. At the end of a full rotation, which I'm putting air quotes around because that would be a full 4 years of alfalfa followed by another 4 year, or another at the end of the 4 years of alfalfa, or at the end of 4 years of a wheat cotton double crop. We'll do a laser leveling touch up to the fields because everything is flood irrigated here. And you'll get some erosion from doing that you need to kind of fix at the end of that period to make sure that the water is spreading evenly over the field. But that's the extent of it. We just, we run a single pass. Like if it's coming out of cotton, let's say, we'll go through, pick the cotton, shred the stalks, run a single pass machine. It's just kind of an all-in-one implement that does some ripping and undercut the stalks, or undercut the roots of the cotton plant. And then we just go right in after that with the planter and drill in wheat and start that whole thing all over again. That's actually what we're in the middle of right now, is we're picking cotton. We did have a delay because of the rain, but we're back into picking cotton and just trying to plant basically as fast as we can. So that system we think has some benefits to soil health. Well, we know it has benefits to soil health. We also think it, has a lot of other like beneficial aspects for the crop. The other big deal is it's more economical. I mean, not having to plow or do, it used to be, from what I hear, 3, 4, 5 kind of passes with different implements over the fields doing, disking, plowing. So, you're burning a lot more man hours, you're burning a lot more fuel, you're doing a lot more. And if you don't need to, basically, why do it? So there's some principles that make conservation tillage or, minimum no-till kind of what it is. And it's been practiced for a long time in the Midwest. It's just that adapting it to kind of a arid agriculture, Western irrigated system was something that my dad and my uncles and my cousins had to figure out how to do. That was something that I think nobody had really figured out as much. It's a whole different ballgame when you have border flood system that you have to maintain. You can't just run over the whole field with an implement and tear everything, or a one pass like ripper and then plant and call it a day like you can in the Midwest where you don't have irrigation. You can everything's a field from one end to the other of a horizon. Basically, you don't have to worry about a contour of the land necessarily because you're not irrigating, right? You don't really care too much about where the flow of the water is going, or that's something that we have to think about constantly. So recent experiment that we've been undergoing is we do have some buried drip tape at our farm in Gila Bend. It's about 240 acres that I believe this is our second full year of having installed. It was partly funded by the water irrigation efficiency grant through the U of A extension, who gets the money allocated to them at the state level through the state budget. And that was the only way, frankly, that we were going to install that system because, it was very expensive. It was over $3,000 an acre total. But the property that we put it on was very poor soil quality, very sandy, very high slope. Just had a lot of issues kind of with that farm. And we just now are getting kind of our early preliminary. We had cotton on that this year and last year. And just comparing, the first year was a little rough, but it was, us learning a new system. This year looks like we're getting a fantastic yield, but probably the best yield, if close to the best, if not the best yield we've ever gotten on that farm. And I have no doubt that that's, only possible because of that kind of technology. But it's a question I get a lot with, people outside of agriculture, only barely familiar with it, is why aren't you using drip irrigation? You got to be more efficient with your water usage. And the answer is it's costly, and that's property that we own, whereas everything around here is property that we lease, and it makes absolutely no sense to install something that costs that much money that is not removable from the ground on property that you don't own. And that's something I think a lot of people don't understand, is how many farmers do not own the property that they farm. I would say 99% probably. A very high percent.
In a state where we're majority public lands, I think that's a big difference when you look at agriculture, like from here to the Midwest, right? So Midwest is a lot of private ground, and you can do whatever you want with it, and your investment will stay with that property, and that aids to, your equity in the land. But that's not the case for a lot of farmers here. Mm-hmm. And the sheer amount that it costs to switch an irrigation system, which you can say that you should do that like the drop of a hat, but in reality, not only the cost, but what kind of manpower did you have in installing that?
Not just in the installation, but in the essentially kind of follow-up, work that had to be done. What I mean by that is mean, no system's perfect. Yeah, I mean, it was a company from New Mexico that came in and did the installation of the drip, but there's a bunch of sections in it that would break. And so we had manpower and our guys having to be out there all the time, watching for leaks, going out to where the leak was, digging it up, cutting out that section of tape, splicing in a new section and reburying it. And a lot of it, frankly, was from golfers. That's the other big issue, is they'll just tear right through whole sections of that tape. And so we, then had to implement an entire, I mean, we've always had gophers on the property, but had to implement an entire regime of, really cracking down on between, traps and, chemicals and everything else to prevent that infestation to really decrease their numbers, prevent it from getting worse. Because that was, I mean, like I just said, when you spend all this money installing something, the last thing you want to do is have to, spend all this extra manpower and money to fix it, basically. But that's where we were at. Finally was able to get that under control. And since then, it's been, relatively hassle-free. I would say the other big decision or change we made this year was been with a company called Swan Systems. That's a irrigation scheduling company where they do you use satellite maps to kind of judge the stage of the crop. And then, because we have now very good data on knowing everything that comes through the flow meter and goes into the drip system, we know what that number is. So basically we can say we're applying this amount. They have ways of measuring the evaporative ET with satellites. You talk about these two numbers and you say, okay, well, you need to be applying this much per day to keep up with, evaporative loss, especially in the summer, like temperatures. Just making sure, because I'm used to seeing it flood irrigating where I'm looking at the plant or I'm looking at the ground and it's, the ground's saturated, it's wet. Or you can look out there and see the plant, drooping really hard in the summer and be like, okay, needs another shot of water. We got to put some more on there. With drip irrigation, it's a whole different deal because the surface is completely dry or almost completely dry pretty much the whole time. But the plant, looks fine. So you really rely on those implements, or there's also soil moisture sensors installed on that farm. All of that through U of A Extension has been the ones that have been, we're involved with studies that we try to really maintain that relationship for sure with Extension, because they're invaluable to just helping us see what's out there and trying new things. I would have never known about or been involved with the Swan Systems company if it wasn't, having had that introduction essentially through U of A Extension and had them kind of do this. This year was a sort of a test year, a pilot run basically for the system. And I think there's no doubt that it made a difference, because there was several times where my cousin John and I were going over the numbers of what we needed to do, what he was needing to apply, how long he needed to run the system. And we probably wouldn't have done that in a previous year. We would have just said, oh, it looks fine, just keep it going. But, when you look at the numbers and it very clearly shows that the plant is using this and you're applying this and there's a discrepancy between there, it's okay. We got to, bump it up a little bit or irrigate for another, whatever it is, 10-hour set in the next 2 days or something like that. So yeah, it's been a whole journey. It was not just an easy, oh yeah, we'll put the drip in and wow, look at that, everything's great. It's been a very much a learning curve experience for sure.
In hearing you explain all of this, I think what a lot of people don't see a lot is that farming is very technical. And one thing that I hear farmers, ranchers, everybody say all the time, my dad says it all the time, I'm just a farmer. Well, you're never just a farmer. You're a farmer and a meteorologist and a data analyst and a research scientist and a logistics guru and all of these things. Also, you're the mechanic, you're, the head of your household. The list is endless when it comes to that. And I think maybe when people hear, that you went and you got your bachelor's degree and then you got a master's with a law emphasis, how does that make sense for a farmer? How many contracts do you go through in a week?
Yeah, so we have our leases are less now than they were when I first started, probably, within the last 5 years. You can see, by the map that we've lost quite a bit of property, but I think at max, we probably had close to 60 leases. Now we might have 35, something like that. But unfortunately, what happens also is the more that this property gets developed, chunks of it get sold to, because it's all real estate speculators, basically, right? It's people who hold property for the purpose of selling it in the future. They will sell off a chunk to someone else. Well, now that's a new lease, and it's maybe a 20-acre piece of something that was, I mean, it doesn't match the fields at all, right? It's not like they're selling a field at a time. So it might be a chunk of one field and a chunk of another field. Now they own that piece. That's a new lease. You got to maintain that, got to pay that on time, all that kind of thing, right? So even though your total property has not increased really at all, you now have the same amount of property that you're farming, and it's just getting fragmented into all these different owners and leases. And I mean, a lot of the time the leases are, they're pretty standard, they're boilerplate, but like just keeping track of everything and making sure that there's provisions in there for termination reimbursement. That's something that, when these guys want their property back, they want it soon. And if I have a wheat field that is, say, usually we're harvesting April, May, if it's March and I put all of the, cost into that farm and that field, and the seed, the water, the fertilizer, usually we don't spray wheat, but if there was any sprays or anything that we needed to do on that, and then that those are my sunk costs, and then he's saying I need it in 30 days, you just have to make sure that in those leases there's provisions for 60 to 90 days termination at least, and cost reimbursement if they want it sooner, or if that's in the middle of a crop, that we're going to get at least our money back on what it costs to put that crop in. Because if you don't have those kinds of things, it's very easy to be unfortunately in a situation where they're just taking the property back and there's nothing you can do about it. So, and that's just for property leases. There's all kinds of other things we're doing. I mean, where we do own ground in Buckeye. Like I said, we own ground in California that we've been selling. That's primarily where we've been buying land, has been in Buckeye. And there's a lot of involved in that. Real estate transactions are also very heavy on legalese and signing documents and contracts and exchanges and all that kind of thing. So it's been beneficial for sure to have that kind of background. The other big aspect, like the first thing I thought of when you were going through the list of all the things a farmer is financial understanding. I mean, the finances of knowing, what's going on, how to run a business, where you're at, whether you're underwater or not on a, managing crop lines and, all these other things it's difficult. You're dealing with such a different horizon. I think when people who maybe even are business owners or entrepreneurs on their own manage a business, they think it's similar to farming, and it maybe is in some ways, but really it's not. I mean, we've got basically on a double crop field, I've got 2 sales a year on so I'm stretching out a crop line for 6, 7, 8 months sometimes, making payments, and then getting one, lump sum, basically payment to pay everything down on. It really helps having partners, like we're, a lot of our stuff is through John Deere or Ag West. It really helps having partners who understand where, if I went to a regular bank and tried to do what I'm doing, they would probably not let me do it. They would be like, what do you mean you need to borrow this amount of money for, and we're not going to see any kind of return on it for the next, 9-8 months. So it really helps having people who understand kind of the agricultural market. The other big issue is when prices of inputs go up. If I'm any other business owner, traditionally, I pass those cost increases down to my customers, right? That's how businesses traditionally operate. Of course, there's some leeway there in how much you're going to pass that cost increase down, and sometimes you'll eat the cost. I don't have a choice. I'm a price taker. I have absolutely no effect on what the outcome and price of my product is. Cotton is sold on a, globally traded market. You can go in there and look at it right now. I don't want to because the price is terrible and I hate looking at it. But it's, it's really unfortunate in a situation like this, like with cotton, where, I know that there's no way I can really kind of increase that price. And so you have to build your crop budgets with those prices in mind. But, we see over the last couple of years, especially, we've seen input prices go up a lot, and there's absolutely nothing I can do to pass that on. What really gets me is the consumer, because I am also a consumer because I eat food and wear clothes. I know that those prices are going up too. So I know those prices are going up, but my price hasn't gone up to the price to me. So people in between are capturing, some of that return, but it does not get back to the farmer. And that is another thing that I think part of the advocacy part of Farm Bureau is, why that's important, is telling that story, that when people go to the grocery store and they see a lot of those prices going up for certain products, sometimes it's going back to the farmer for sure. I hope it is, but a lot of the time, frankly, it is not. I try to buy shirts. I buy dress shirts or jeans, and I look at, huge increases in some areas in price, and I know that cotton is at a historic low. It is same price as it was in like 1974, and so I know that those price increases are not coming back to me. That's for sure.
As someone who has a large closet full of clothes, can attest, you can't, especially probably more so women will understand, but you're hard pressed to find a pair of jeans that's under $100. Mm-hmm. And, if the price of cotton is the same it was in 1974, I can guarantee you that jeans were not $100 in 1974. No. And so, where are we losing that cost benefit? It's in the middle. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate for the farmer. And as, a consumer on a budget, it's also unfortunate.
No, absolutely. Denim's one of the best. We love seeing denim sold because it's the highest quantity. Basically, it's heavyweight material, right? So it uses a lot of cotton. But even then, it's like a couple of pounds of cotton in a pair of denim jeans, and at current price 64 cents, so a pound. So you're talking maybe $2 of that is the actual cost to me of the cotton. And that's frankly not even including hauling and there's some other stuff in there, but we'll even using those round numbers, it would be like $1.20, $1.50, like, great. That's, about 1%, 1 to 2% of that cost. So
not ideal. And speaking of, you spoke about the map. So for everyone listening, I kind of want to paint this picture. I'm staring at this map that is an aerial shot of land about where we sit, mm-hmm. right? And there's a ton of green patches, and those are plots that they have been farming for how long would you say?
2017, but I would say that we were farming at least this much. Probably at least 15 years, I would say. Some of it, like the stuff around here, what we call the home place, like down by where we are right now. We've been farming this property right here was 1946. Everything around it easily since, 50s, 60s. I think there used to be a lot more families in this area, and then my dad and my uncle started taking over more farmland as kind of other families left. So probably the 500 and something acres here, definitely since 46. And then there's probably about 1,000 here south of Broadway. So since the 60s, everything north up there is somewhat more recent. That was just, again, other farmers that kind of stopped farming, so we took over a lot of that stuff. But still, probably 15, 20 years. And that red line at the top is the I-10, just for like scale of reference, right? So that's where that is. And then this is the 303. This is Cotton Lane right here on the 303. So it's in total, you can see down there, it was about 4,000 acres represented on just this map. And I would say it might be 1,000 now. Might be probably a little less. So it's, like I said, we still farm about 5,000 acres, but it's just moved a lot to further west to Buckeye and beyond Gila Bend, and then out by Painted Rock at the Poco de Nero Ranch, which is pretty far out there.
So just this visual representation, I think, is really telling, because we look at all of these green squares where you are farming, or in a lot of cases used to farm, because the number of squares that have a big X through them are more than the ones that are not.
Yes, yeah, for sure. By a lot.
By a lot. And so, we think about agriculture, and, I think the big question that we hear a lot of times is, why do we farm in the desert? And why is it necessary? And at the end of the day, agriculture is essential for everyone, and Arizona agriculture in particular. And when we want to see responsible growth when it comes to our communities, especially here in the Valley. But I think the unintentioned cost of that is that we're pushing farmers out, and therefore, we're losing a number of farmers because they can't afford to move. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of telling of the times almost, and not to get too depressing, but it's tough. So how have you guys managed to continue operating at this level with, we've got data centers and warehouses directly across from this building, which is just wild to me, to stand in the cotton field and then be right next door to a data center.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's Microsoft across the street, and that was a farm that we were farming not even 5 years ago, 240 acres. Now it's 5, I think, buildings that are data centers, as well as, substations and all the ancillary equipment and stuff that comes with that. I would say that where we're at right now for the operation of our size, we have about 23 full-time employees. And like I said, the partners, everybody, 5,000 acres, floating around that 4,000 to 5,000 acre kind of range is probably as low as you can go to still make, an operation viable. I mean, we've had that conversation about, especially not just overall operations, but also this headquarters location in particular. I mean, we're absolutely going to have to move. We know for a fact that right to the south half of this property, this is 30 acres, where the headquarters, 15 of it is, we're already in talks with ADOT. It's going to be condemned for a new State Route 30 that's going to connect the 202 south to the 303. So it's going to, kind of be an east-west road that'll go right through, kind of this area, and not just our property, but everything. We don't own that, but they've already condemned it. They've already, we have leases with ADOT on what they took over. Now, the time frame for that is probably not anywhere, I wouldn't say, closer than 8 years. It's going to take them at least that long to, finish the condemnation for the rest of the stuff and actually start construction. And they're going to do it in stages and all this kind of thing. And it will be a parkway before it's a freeway, but still, they're going to be doing that for a while. But in short, I mean, yeah, it's not easy. I think if we didn't own some of the amount of property that we own, I don't think we would probably still be in business. Meaning, if we were leasing every single bit of what we were farming, I don't know how we would be still in business. I think it would be too difficult. But no, it's very much, this is a time of change. My dad and my uncle are not getting any younger, and they're not ever going to retire, I'm sure, but they're transitioning, and we are transitioning from, kind of old management to new management in a lot of ways. I mean, it's silly of me probably to say that, because my cousins have been doing this for, my entire life, plus some. So they're a little bit older than me, but so they're not new to management by any means, or, stretch of the word, but there's still, still some transitions to be made. I would say really that our kind of future plans, current and future plans have just been, trying to keep costs down, because that's basically the only side of, like I said, if you can't increase the price that you're getting, you can't increase your revenue, your income, the only thing you can control is cost, and, trying to keep costs down. Unfortunately, when cottonseed is the most expensive it's ever been, and fertilizer has come down a little bit, so that's good. But there's been, the last couple of years, especially when like the war in Ukraine started, fertilizer prices spiked super hard. And that really impacted a lot of people. And just trying to, kind of keep trucking. But I remember last year I was making a budget, make farm crop budgets for ourselves and for our lenders to show them, kind of what we're planning. And I was making one. This was, for last year's crop, and I was kind of scratching my head looking at it, and I remember printing it out and taking it back to my dad and being like, did I do something wrong? Like, these numbers are really bad. And he was like, no, yeah, that's right. And I was like, what? And he just told me, he's like, some years basically you're playing offense, some years you're playing defense. And the last couple of years have just been definitely some defense years, where it sounds bad to say it, but you're trying to lose as little money as possible, because you basically know that you're not going to really make money. The only thing that helps is commiserating with other farmers and again, having bankers that understand the situation, because if they're in the ag world, I mean, it's not us specifically, it's across the board, right? It's everybody. So when everybody's having a hard time, they're aware of it, and they know that you're just going to do what you can. That's pretty much all we can do. But I think we've got some hope, and some different projects kind of coming down the pipeline that maybe we can kind of shift to, or things like drip, or specialty crops, or other, it seems like that's kind of something that I hear a lot from other people, is everyone's trying to have like a niche market kind of approach nowadays, just to make a little bit more of then you can control the price a little bit, right? If you're doing something like local selling, or some other kind of specialty product or specialty market that you're selling into, you can try to get a premium. It's just, unfortunately, that's more of a matter of marketing and spending a little bit more time on that end of it. But
so, looking at the future of the farm and any diversification and specialty crops, what does that look like for you guys?
Well, right now we've been working on a project for the last couple of years. It's gone through a lot of iterations and challenges, but it's got, essentially, we've been involved with some vertical farming, which is another way of saying, some people say CEA. TCEA is also the other thing I hear, which is total controlled environment agriculture, or controlled environment agriculture. Some people consider, which is accurate, greenhouses to be controlled environment agriculture. Greenhouses, and I know this because I operated one, like I said, obviously on a very small scale, but in high school. In the valley here in particular, greenhouses are not a great option for about 6 months of the year. It gets so hot, making a thing that makes it hotter does not work. If you're in Wilcox or somewhere else that's a little bit higher elevation, great success from what I've heard in greenhouses, because they have just, a little bit of a different climate. That's where TCEA comes in, which is total controlled environment agriculture, which is essentially a completely enclosed box, no windows, no glass, that you're using LED lights for light, and you're recycling the air, you're recycling the water, you're basically operating like the entire place is in a vacuum. And that's actually where a lot of the early research in that field has been pioneered through a lot of different companies and programs, but for things like NASA and Canadian Space Agency and European Space Agency, for trying to grow plants in space to feed, astronauts, and also any kind of future projects on the moon or Mars or something like that, because you have to have an environment where every single aspect of a plant's propagation is supplied artificially, right? Now, they also have to worry about artificial gravity, which obviously you don't have to worry about here, but that project has been kind of culminating recently we're going to have a trial facility that we're ordering equipment and getting everything set up right now. That's actually going to be in what used to be the old dairy barn just south of here on the property. It's from the 40s. It's a very old slung block building, but we've already retrofitted basically the inside of it and put in insulated metal panels, which are, just almost like a cooler. It's just metal, thin metal on each side, and then a bunch of foam in between that provides, very high R value or insulating value, and electricity, and then water. I mean, we've got water here on the site. We've got, we use our well water, but that's been the primary restrictor for our entire farming operation, and why we grow the crops that we grow is the groundwater here is very shallow, which is great for power usage and for, basically total water availability, but it's very salty. It typically runs over 3,000 parts per million salinity, which, to put that in perspective, for us to grow vegetables, we would probably need water salinity somewhere between 600 and 800. So it's not close at all. And that's why we grow the crops that we grow, is because they're more salinity tolerant. Also, application of the water to the soil. The soils in this area used to be, like my dad talks about when he was a kid out here with his dad. I mean, there's some places in this farm that were straight up just an alkali flat, like there was white on top because there was so much salt basically just in the soil. And they would make ponds and just put water out and just leach, like you're just draining water into the soil to try to pull those salts down. Now, when you're also applying salty water, it's a very slow process. So it's been a lot, many decades of remediation basically to these soils to get them to be even where they're at today. When I was a kid, we didn't even grow wheat in a lot of these fields. We grew barley because barley was actually more salt tolerant than wheat is even. And then there's been some changes in plant breeding and all that kind of thing to make it better. But so the only way we figured that this whole setup could work to make something more like vegetables or herbs or lettuce or, kind of any more of a specialty crop is you'd have to find some way of purifying the water. And to do that at scale for the kind of thing that you would need to farm conventionally, completely uneconomical, makes absolutely no sense. But for a total controlled environment operation, you can RO the water and put it in there and have, just pure water basically coming in, putting in your fertilizers, doing everything hydroponic, because you can just keep recycling. You're capturing everything that's coming out, you're recycling it, you're reapplying it. And then the other piece of it is all of the air that, the other big component that plants need is they need gas exchange, right? They need to be converting CO2 into oxygen and capturing that carbon out of the air. You really have to. The other thing they're doing while they're doing that is they're evaporating. But transpiration is occurring. They're pulling water up through their roots and out their leaves, and you have to be pulling that water out of the air with dehumidifying machines. When you do that, you get pure water basically returning, and then you just put that back in the system. And so you have a very, very high, it's like 95 to 99% less water use overall, because everything's, again, controlled. I mean, the only water that's really leaving the system in an ideal situation is in the plant material itself. It's in the lettuce, it's in the herbs, it's in whatever. Now, it's unfortunately a field that in the entire time we've been studying it, which is, again, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of money and a lot of companies that have put money into this field that have had very catastrophic failures. I mean, there's close to $2 billion across, I think, the industry. A couple of big high profile companies one of them was, I think they had total investment was like 800 million, totally bankrupt. Another one was 600 million, totally bankrupt. But what we have found in doing kind of research on this industry in general and going to conventions and meeting with people and, talking to consultants and doing a whole spiel is that every person that we've talked to, and this is not an exaggeration, has told us that oh yeah, you guys are the first conventional farmers that we've talked to that are interested in this. So all of this, kind of technology and everything else that was going on, none of it was coming from conventional farmers, people who knew how to plan and operate a farm. It was people who, basically came at it from a technology side and were approaching it the same way that would approach like a Silicon Valley, tech company acquisition, and thinking that they could, grow the company super fast and not really care about unit economics, meaning, whether they're actually making money per unit of output of whether that's lettuce or what it almost was 100% of the time lettuce. That's mostly what these guys were doing. They never really stopped to consider whether they were making money on each unit. They were just trying to expand as fast as possible, get a high valuation, flip the company, sell it, and, call it a day, walk away without really a care of whether it made sense to do these things. We're approaching it obviously on a completely different viewpoint. I, fully intend we've always said from the very beginning that we wouldn't be doing this. We're not going to do this project if it doesn't make sense to run it as a farm, meaning you run it, to sell food to people at values that both the consumers, want to pay and that we can make money on, just like any other business. And that's how we've been approaching it. And I think that's why it's taken some time. There's a lot of options out there, but pretty much all of them are based on, just buy our technology and, everything will be great. And we really want to test everything ourselves. And that's what this facility is for. It's not very big at all. The scale of the thing really would matter. Our next phase, if this trial works out, would be essentially to put, our own buildings on this property, mirroring in a sense kind of what's across the street with warehouses, because frankly the city of Goodyear is, they would like to see everything in buildings and not agriculture. It's just the way that, kind of development is headed, right? People don't want to have a bunch of buildings or a bunch of industrial stuff and then a farm kind of just right in the middle of it or next to a residential area or on any of that other kind of stuff. Sometimes you can make it work, but like I said, if we were able to do like a farmer's market or something type situation here, maybe we could make that work, but that's not possible with, the kind of soil and water issues that we have. So this is our way of kind of addressing it. Hopefully, we'll be able to make it work. It's definitely a little bit of a Hail Mary kind of, project, but frankly, I think our family has always been kind of on the cutting edge of, trying just new things, seeing what sticks. I really think that that's how you have to push things and succeed, not just as an entrepreneur, but also as a farmer. And, these are some pretty unprecedented times for a lot of reasons. And one of them is the future state of food production in this country and food consumption in this country is changing, and things will have to change too. I don't think total controlled environment agriculture is going to replace conventional farming at all. I do not believe that, all of Yuma is going to become a giant building at some point. But I do believe that the more uncertainty we have in things like Colorado River water supply, in drought conditions, there's going to be some base level percentage of food production that will be coming from systems like this, because you're just going to have that security, basically, because you can have a year or a couple of years where if there's not going to be enough water, or there's going to be some freak storm that takes out production in a space, it already is and will continue to be even more of a shock to the food supply chain. And when you have shocks, you usually have really high skyrocketing prices to consumers. And at some point it's just going to become so, it's already getting there. I mean, it's becoming so untenable that people are like, we can't keep doing this, having this level of uncertainty from year to year. And I think some amount of that certainty is going to come from systems like this that are consistently maintaining an output, because you're completely controlling everything that's going in there. They are high energy use. We help supplement that through all of this property is in the ED8, which is an electrical district rural cooperative that my dad actually started in the 80s. And we own our own generation, which means we control our own price, basically. And the entire purpose is for serving farmers, for serving rural growers and communities. And that I think alone being able to control those prices and have, kind of lower respective energy costs is huge reason why we would even consider kind of this operation, and why it makes sense to do it here, and why we, I think, genuinely have an advantage or an edge over some of these other places where similar operations have failed, has been because they're operating at paying electrical costs that are multiple times higher than kind of what we're paying here. But that being said, with all the data centers moving in and, generation requirements increasing like 5x or something, was what I've heard in the state of Arizona, we will see how long that sticks around. But I still think, if they can do it, why can't we, basically?
So what I'm hearing this whole time was Rayners are going to be farming in space.
No, I've seen some, like we toured a facility in Canada at Guelph, University of Guelph, they've been a partnership with NASA, Canadian Space Agency, and they had these chambers that would, they could measure like almost to a molecule, like the level of, they would have a plant growing, like a single plant growing in there, and all inputs were measured so ridiculously precisely. And they could also simulate like a partial vacuum and make it like have artificial gravity, like they could reduce gravity basically inside the chamber and see what it did to the plant physiology. And he was even talking about how they had tomatoes, like that was a big one, right? They were trying to figure out how to grow tomatoes in space, and tomatoes need pollinators, and so they had bees, and they put bees in there, and they were like, turns out that in the microgravity, bees can't fly because they don't have enough lift, basically, it doesn't work. But he's like, but it didn't stop them. They just were crawling all over the plant and still getting to the flowers, and they couldn't fly, but they still were basically trying to do their same function. He's like, so it worked, like, they had a success, like the plants or the tomatoes were pollinating, but they did not have any flying bees. And they said they weren't quite sure whether that was going to work or not, but it did. So no, it's that research is super critical, but the difference in angle is that when you're doing something like that, you're not really worried about what it costs, right? You're worried about whether you can do it and whether it will continue. You want it to work for as long as possible is really what you're concerned about, because it's somebody's food supply, or it's many people's food supply. I mean, there's probably within limits that you want it to cost, but you're not really concerned about operating it in like a business the way that we're talking about it right now. So that's what I hope, is that we're going to be the first, or one of the first vertical farming companies that, is able to confidently say that we're making money on, per unit of whatever it is that we're selling, and also not being, gouging customers or anything like that on price, because that's also, we want to stay within market price for sure and still be able to make money.
I think just hearing all of this, I could listen to all of this for probably days. It's so incredibly interesting to me. But through this whole conversation today, we've talked a lot about why it's hard and all of the different hats that you wear and all of the things that go into actually being a farmer in Arizona, right? So what is the one thing that keeps you, or maybe more than one thing, but what keeps you so committed to the industry and keeps you passionate? Why do you want to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about that often. I think it really is just even when I was deciding whether or not I wanted to go to law school, and kind of like I was saying, I didn't know if I wanted to. That was the kind of the inflection point, was if I was going to go to law school and be a lawyer, I probably wasn't going to come back on the farm. I might do work with the farm still and all that, but I would, to pay back the law school fees and everything, I would have to be making a lot more money, and I need to have a different plan. And kind of what I realized in doing that is that, especially like comparatively, to my dad and like my uncle, I'm young. Like if it comes down the line in the future where this operation is not tenable anymore and we do have to shut it down or move on, I can figure out something else to do. But this opportunity to do this and to work with my family and to be a part of this that's irreplaceable. I mean, I'm only really going to get this one shot at doing this, and it's not something that, a lot of my friends or any other people I grew up with, they don't have that option. I mean, that's not people can't just decide that they want to be involved in a fairly large scale family farming operation. Like, you can't just start that from scratch. And I mean, that's honestly another huge problem in agriculture, frankly, is how difficult it is for anyone who's not in it to get in it. I mean, I would say it's borderline impossible. And I know that there's a lot of grants and programs and stuff out there that try to help that. And, more power to them for sure, and more power to anybody who wants to make that jump. But I don't know that it's really that possible. So I would say that, yeah, it's just such a unique opportunity, and it is also a legacy. I mean, it's, something that my family's been doing. They've been here at this location since 46. They came to just a few miles up the road here, the area, in 1914. And frankly, I don't even know, they were probably farming before that. I know they were farming in California before that. And then my dad's side of the family, at least, England before that, and they were probably farmers there too. So I mean, it's, who knows how long of a legacy this has been, but in particular in this area, I think, I feel somewhat indebted to my family and to, kind of my ancestors, in really giving it the, college try, like really figuring out, like, if there's something I can contribute. And that's kind of, playing to our strengths, I think is what makes this operation run the way that it does. I think I try to lean into more on the financial, business, legal side of things, and try to, kind of keep that running for the operation. And my cousins and my uncle are, more on the operation side of things. But if everybody plays to their strengths and kind of works together, then, we can make this work. So it's the uniqueness of the opportunity and the kind of the gratitude I feel for, my family having kept this operation going this long, and how much I would like to keep it going, for the next generation. I think it might look different, or there's 100% chance it will look different, but being able to keep it going in any capacity, and also just being able to, at the end of the day, feel good about, what I do, is a big thing. I really enjoy being able to tell people that, the jeans they're wearing, or, the pasta they're eating, or other things is come from something that I helped create in some small way. That's a very good feeling to have at the end of the day. There's not a lot of industries, I feel like, that are involved in that pure level of creation, right? Where it's like literally, the plant's doing all the work, but I'm taking credit for it, and it's making something out of, these inert kind of materials into a thing that everyone needs. So,
well, we appreciate you taking the time and putting on your Farm Bureau advocacy marketing hat today to kind of carve out some time for us and share, a little bit about you and your family and your legacy and what that looks like. And I think it's really inspirational, and also just, helps paint a picture about what it is that we really do out here.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in this week for an exhilarating chat with Ross Rayner about all things agriculture in the Valley. Join us next week for another AgReport edition of Arizona Agriculture Connection. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, Farm Bureau has a place for you. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends on socials. You can also visit our website, maricopacountyfb.org, for more information and to submit a topic you want to learn about. Remember to tune in every Wednesday wherever you listen to podcasts. A huge thank you to Paloma Ready Mix and Materials for supporting our agriculture producers and this podcast. Maricopa County Farm Bureau, bringing you the stories of real families, real farms, and real food. I'm Nicole Clements, signing off. Catch you next week.